Premier, it's good to see you again.
Hi,
Thanks
David.
for being here. You said you were encouraged. I don't know if I've seen you say that after many meetings you've had with the federal government in your time as Premier of Alberta.
I haven't heard a Prime Minister say we want to build a bitumen pipeline to the northwest coast in a long time. And so I think that the fact that we have a change of tone and a change of direction from this Prime Minister is very encouraging. And he seems to be open to having a dual track where he wants to identify specific projects that have a reasonable likelihood of getting built, as well as have a very strong national interest profile to them. So I think we can make that case. But I've also said that from our perspective, we want the private sector building pipelines. And we have to create an environment where the private sector feels confidence that they can initiate a process and then get it approved and completed in a reasonable period of time. So that's going to require us to look at some changes in regulations and laws. And I think he's going to, it seemed to me that he's prepared to do a dual track on that.
He said a couple of things here. First of all, I want to look at the communique because there is the reference to clean and conventional energy projects, and conventional energy is the shorthand the Prime Minister has used. And people have criticized him for avoiding the phrase oil and gas, but it's right there. You know, he talks about critical minerals and decarbonized Canadian oil and gas by pipelines, plural, supported by the private sector. Does that necessarily mean to Prince Rupert or to Kitimat, could this be further expansion of TMX, for example, to reduce risk up in that area of British Columbia, but, you know, get around the tanker ban and just boost capacity? Do you care about the route as long as it gets you to the market you want?
I think it's important for it to be a route that goes to the northwest BC coast, because when you look at what the value proposition was for Northern Gateway, and keep in mind at the time it was only a 595,000 barrel a day project, it would have generated $72 billion worth of benefit for provinces and I think $59 billion worth of revenue for the federal government. These are extraordinary projects. So yes, you can get incremental barrels out of our existing pipelines, and we should do that too. But if you want to have a major impact of expanding new markets in the markets that want us, Korea, Japan and elsewhere, then you need to have a major new bitumen pipeline. And if you want to be able to pay for the decarbonization project, which is the Pathways project, you do need to have a new source of revenue to be able to do that. And that means a new significant egress option with a pipeline.
So when you talk about a decarbonized Canadian oil and gas, that will seem like a contradiction to a lot of people because, you know, the downstream of burning of any barrel of oil or natural gas does create emissions. So they cannot be completely decarbonized at its end use. But at the front end, it's cleaner energy at the production sites, it's carbon capture. These are big investments. Do you think there's private sector companies out there right now who are willing to meet this standard in order to get in the pipeline for a pipeline?
Well, yes. I mean, I was supportive of this because it really was industry who was leading it. So there are 6 major players in the Pathways project. Some of the biggest names you'll recognize: CNRL and Cenovus, Meg and Suncor, Imperial. And they have put forward this proposal that they would have a track where they not only develop carbon capture and utilization facilities, but then also look at decarbonizing through either bringing in small modular reactors, or if we get interties coming from British Columbia and from Manitoba, potentially hydroelectric power. And then that last mile is direct air capture. And so we've already had success with carbon engineering. They developed direct air capture. We've got a direct air capture program in Innisfail. And so I think that will be the other way that you're able to address the issue of emissions, by being able to offset them. In addition, we also know that with LNG, exporting LNG, especially to Asia, will reduce global emissions because it's crowding out heavier polluting fuels like coal, like wood, like dung, especially if you're going down through India and other nations. And so I think that the ability for us to reduce global emissions with cleaner Canadian products is very high.
The Prime Minister Carney said a lot of things about the opportunities in the Asian markets that I don't think we would have heard from Prime Minister Trudeau in terms of, like, it is a reality, it's there, it's a target, and you can go there. But what he didn't do is list a pipeline as one of the first nation building projects. And this was one of the conditions in your letter that you sent to the Prime Minister, a pretty comprehensive letter. Even if it doesn't meet the letter of what you wrote to him, do you think he hit this bar at least conceptually and in spirit?
I think the fact that he mentioned it twice in the press conference tells you that it's very much on his mind. I mean, there is the we have to figure out who the proponent is going to be, who's going to build it. Are we going to be able to successfully get a consortium or an existing pipeline company to resurrect that project, or is it going to have to be a federal built project, or is it going to have to be a provincial led project? My preference is always to have the private sector lead it. It's a chicken and egg problem. You don't get a proponent until you have some certainty around the regulatory process. TC Energy has openly revealed that they wrote off $9 billion worth of expenses from starting through a regulatory process that they couldn't see the end to and ultimately ended up having to abandon, or pipelines didn't get approved so that they could start earning revenue off it. So you can imagine why it is our pipeline companies are a little bit gun shy. They want to make sure that they know that once they begin and they go down the process, that it's going to be successful. So I think the Prime Minister still has some work to do, especially with the 9 policies that we know are creating that uncertainty in the investment climate. But I think today there clearly was a spirit of wanting to cooperate, not only among the premiers, but also with the Prime Minister. So I'm encouraged by that.
You tied this to national unity, though, and, right? And with what is, you've talked about a process that could lead very well to a referendum in your province next year. In terms of like satisfying some of those concerns, the bigger concerns that could fuel this separatist sentiment amongst a certain part of your population, does this deal with it a bit?
It's necessary but not sufficient. I mean, the encouraging words are one thing, the commitment to looking at these projects, the commitment from the Prime Minister to being an energy superpower and wanting to get that pipeline built are all very positive. But I think we will know once we see the legislation that comes out and once we see how quickly he's able to move on making some of the changes that we need. That is what I'm going to gauge. I tried for 2.5 years to get to some level of accommodation with the former Prime Minister. I feel like we're already further ahead than I was in those 2.5 years. So I want to be optimistic about it, but I'll be frank, there is still some more work to do. Because if we don't see either a major repeal or rewrite of those 9 terrible laws, it isn't going to do enough to change the environment to encourage private sector investment. So it has to be both.
But, as a final point, I mean, I don't know if they're going to repeal their legislative agenda. 8.5 million people voted for the Liberals knowing this was what was in their policy book and the laws of the land. And there is a big constituency in Canada who want these sort of environmental measures. But the flexibility that was offered, at least conceptually, in your private meeting with the Prime Minister, as I understand it, and, it's certainly in the public comments today, I mean, does that not offer you a way to navigate some of the challenges that exist in the existing laws?
I interpret the election results a bit differently than that. I think that the Liberals were facing wipeout because of the terrible policies that they put in place, because of the pushback that they got on their green agenda, and the fact that the very first action the Prime Minister took was to repeal the carbon tax demonstrates that they have gone too far. So the question, I don't think he had any time to repeal those laws because he never got into the Parliament. Now there is an opportunity for him to have that discussion.
But did he indicate to you he intends to do that? It doesn't seem like it in my conversations with his officials.
I can tell you there's no way to have a bitumen pipeline going to the Northwest Coast without repealing the tanker ban in some way. Like, they're mutually exclusive. And so the fact that he mentioned that a couple of times suggests to me that there will be some kind of accommodation. I don't know what that looks like yet, but we're going to work with them in a spirit of goodwill to try to get there. I think the fact that you saw all of the premiers today sign off on a communique that involved conventional fuels, oil and gas, pipelines mentioned specifically. Right. I think that's a real sea change from where we were 6 months ago.
It's a different First Minister's table. Premier Danielle Smith, we always appreciate the time. We've got to let you go. We've got to check in with the president. We're going to bring in one of your colleagues. So thanks for being here. All right, that's Alberta Premier Danielle Smith.